So, welcome to this Legal Aid New South Wales Law webinar on motor vehicle accidents, what to do and who can help. My name is Kerry Wright and I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. I'm here today with Alice Lynn from the Financial Rights Legal Centre and Josh Scotland from the Legal Aid New South Wales Community Legal Education team as well. To begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. We'd also like to pay respect to the elders of this land, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today or watching the recording. So the purpose of this webinar is to introduce you to the Motor Accident Problem Solver Guided Pathway developed by the Financial Rights Legal Centre. We're providing legal information, not legal advice, but we will tell you where you can refer your clients to at the end of the webinar for free legal help. So the slide coming up now is just an overview of what we're going to cover today. And just to let you know, there is a handout on your control panel that you can download, and that's a copy of the presentation that we're using today. So what we're going to cover is finding out a bit more about the Financial Rights Legal Centre, the law around motor vehicle accidents in New South Wales, legal services available to help, what is the motor vehicle accident problem solver, how to use the tool and making referrals, and then answer your questions. So what we'll do is just start with a quick poll question. So I'm going to launch that now and find out from you, how confident are you in spotting your client's legal problems? The options are very confident, confident, sort of confident, or not at all. And I guess we're talking about a whole range of legal problems, not all only to do with motor vehicles. So I'll just let people answer that. And we'll close that poll and share the results with you, Josh and Alice. You can see there, 48% said sort of confident, 28% confident, 16% very confident, and a small amount not at all. So we've got a good mix of people with us today who have some experience helping their clients identify their legal problems. So Josh, maybe you can take us through this slide now. So tell our audience why they're so important to us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Kerry. And I guess the thing that we really wanted to emphasize is that a lot of the clients and the people in our community that are facing the most disadvantage often won't go and see a lawyer. So it's really, without community workers and people that are working on the front line, you can end up in a situation where the people that most need to see a lawyer don't need to see a lawyer. Don't end up seeing a lawyer. So I just wanted to emphasize that you people at the front line who are working with clients with lots of different issues, I imagine. I don't know exactly who is on the call, but I know generally we have quite a broad spectrum of people who attend these webinars, and that part of your role, we're hoping, is that you can spot legal problems with the clients that you're working with and refer them to an appropriate legal service. As I was talking about before, it is that situation of many clients will go to you before they go to see a lawyer, and we know that people will often speak to a friend or a neighbour before going to see a lawyer, and sometimes, depending on what their friend or neighbour says, they may not even go to see a lawyer, or they may not even identify that they have a legal problem. So sometimes people have legal problems and they're not even seeing them as legal problems. For example, somebody gets a fine and they may not see that as a legal issue, but we definitely see it as a legal issue, and there's legal solutions to that kind of problem. And just emphasizing that again, that you really are best placed to help your clients get legal help from a lawyer, and that often a lawyer can give that free confidential legal advice from a community legal centre or from Legal Aid New South Wales.
Okay, so thanks, Josh. So Alice, do you want to tell us about the Financial Rights Legal Centre?
Sure. So we're a community legal centre and we have a mix of both financial counsellors and solicitors. We run a number of phone hotlines. So we're one of the service providers for the National Debt Helpline in New South Wales. We have a legal advice line for credit matters, and we have the insurance law service, which I'll be focusing on today because that's a service that handles the vast majority of our motor vehicle accident inquiries. And that really is a huge volume of our work. People who are involved in car accidents and either are uninsured or have insurance and have issues with their claims. So if you need to contact our service, we have a hotline available for the general public, that 1300 number that you can see on the screen. We have recently had to cut down the hours for that service to 10 to 1 p.m. because of loss of solicitors, and it's a funding issue, so we've had to reduce hours. If you do need to refer someone to call us, please ask them to be persistent because we can be quite tricky to get through to. It is a national service, so demand does outstrip supply. If you have any questions about our website or any issues that your clients are facing, please feel free to call us on our caseworker line. So we do answer that line as a priority line, and that's the 1-800 number that you see on your screen there, and it's available between 9:30 to 4:30, Mondays through to Fridays.
Okay, so I might just read out those numbers, Alice. So it's 1300 663 464 for the public between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. That's Monday to Friday, I assume.
Yes.
And then for caseworkers, they can call you on 1-800 650 084 from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Okay, great. All right. So that's the Financial Rights Legal Centre. So Josh, do you want to talk to our audience about law and motor vehicle accidents?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give a bit of a rundown, and Alice, if you want to jump in at any time, feel free. I guess I wanted to manage people's expectations for this webinar that we won't be looking at what happens if you're injured during a motor vehicle accident. All car owners in New South Wales must have compulsory third-party personal injury green slip insurance, but that insurance is only for personal injury, and so it doesn't provide any insurance for property damage. So kind of the only thing that we will say around if you are injured in a motor vehicle accident or one of your clients is that even if it was your fault, you should call the State Insurance Regulatory Authority, or SIRA, on 1300 656 919 for help with making a claim immediately, as there's quite strict time limits there. So the time limit is 6 months from the date of the accident. In terms of who is at fault when you have a motor vehicle accident, that can be quite a complex thing to figure out. The Australian road rules there's a lot of them, and it can be quite difficult depending on the situation to figure out who exactly is at fault, and it could be possible that both people are at fault to different degrees. And Legal Aid New South Wales, for example, we generally would not give any advice about who is at fault with a motor vehicle accident. And so your options there, if it's very unclear around who is at fault, is you may need to get advice from a private lawyer. And we'll talk about that a little bit later around how you can get in contact with a private lawyer in your area who has expertise in this area. In terms of what to do when you first have an accident, the first thing is probably to consider if you should contact police. A lot of people, I've had clients tell me that they thought that every time you had an accident, you have to contact the police, which is not true. So you must call police if a person has been injured or is trapped in their vehicle, or if police are needed to direct traffic or deal with the hazards that have resulted from the accident, or if a car needs to be towed away, or if somebody is refusing to give you their contact details, or if you suspect that another driver involved in the accident was under the influence of alcohol or drugs. But if none of those things apply and it's just property damage, then you don't need to contact police. The other thing that I would say is that if a car does require towing, then after leaving the crash site, you should report the crash to the police assistance line on 131 444 as soon as possible. Okay, so that's kind of a few comments about police and when you need to call them. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is when you obviously want to get the contact details of the other person involved in the accident. So you want to get their name, contact details, and license and car registration number. If the other person is being difficult for some reason and is refusing to provide their details, as mentioned before, you could contact police. But also, if you get their license plate, you can also make a request to the Roads and Maritime Services for the owner of the vehicle. And so that can be one way that you can track down the owner of the vehicle. The other thing to think about is, are there any witnesses around? And you may want to get their contact details so that if there's somebody who may be able to support your version of what happened in the accident, that can be very helpful later on if you end up needing to go to court and you're not able to resolve it initially. You may also want to take some photographs of what's happened. If there's any skid marks or anything like that, it can be really good to get some photos so that you've got that contemporaneous evidence that you may be able to use later if it does go to court. And hopefully you're able to resolve the matter without it going to court. But it's good to be cautious and work on the assumption that you want to collect all of the evidence that you'll need if you do end up needing to go to court. It can be very good to write down a few notes for yourself in terms of what time, what date did the accident happen, what streets are you on, and once again, getting those contact details of any other witnesses. You could even look around to see if there's any cameras where there could potentially be CCTV footage that you could request. That could also be useful evidence for you. If the police do attend, it's good to get the event number, as that could also be good evidence.
Can I just add, some people come to us and say, oh, the police said that I wasn't at fault or something along those lines. So just be aware that police don't actually determine who's at fault. They might sometimes express an opinion about it at the scene, but it's not determinative.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alice, that's great. The kind of the next stage, and we will get into this in more detail throughout what we're talking about today, is it may be very clear who's at fault, but the next thing to do is to try to negotiate who is going to pay. If you think the other driver is at fault, you could send them a letter of demand saying that you, on this date, you're involved in a motor vehicle accident with me, and I'm holding you responsible for the damage that occurred on that date, and something very simple along those lines. The motor vehicle accident problem solver tool that we're going to be talking about shortly has template letters, I understand, that can be really helpful, and the Law Access website as well has template letters that you could send to the other driver in that situation. And I guess kind of some of the other steps that can happen after that, if you're not able to resolve it, is that you could try negotiating the matter yourself, or you could try and use a mediator to try to resolve the dispute with the other party. And of course, we haven't talked about insurance, which is the big issue of whether somebody's insured or not. The insurer may take over at different points throughout this journey. But if it all ends up where you're unable to resolve it, you could end up going to court, which is why that evidence that I've been talking about at the beginning, it can be so helpful, because that's all of the things that you're going to be using to support your case. And it can also be helpful to show the insurer as well, so that they're satisfied that their insured was responsible. Alice, did you have anything else that you wanted to mention there?
Yep, I just wanted to add, like, even if a person is insured, it's always a good idea to get as many details about the other driver as you can. So Josh mentions that the name, the contact number, try and get the address as well, because a lot of policies actually say that the insurance company might waive the excess if their driver was not at fault, and they can supply certain details about the other party. So we often do get calls from people who haven't managed to collect all of that information at the scene, and now they're up for the excess as a result.
Mm-hmm. And would you also be encouraging people to be asking the other driver if they're insured and to get the name of their insurer?
Yep, that's a good idea as well.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to move on, Josh, to the next slide?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so who can help?
Yeah, so there's the motor vehicle accident problem solver. Did you want to talk briefly to that, Alice?
Yep, sure. So our motor vehicle accident problem solver, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's essentially for people who are involved in car accidents. They might be insured, they might have third-party property insurance, or they might have comprehensive insurance, and they need to go through the decisions around, are they at fault? Should they lodge a claim if they're insured, or is it better not to lodge a claim? Or if they're not insured, how do they go about dealing with the insurance company on the other side, whether or not it's that insurance company chasing them for money, or they think they have a claim against the insurance company because it was the insurance company's customer who was at fault. So the problem solver is sort of like a decision tree flow chart to try and help people through those issues.
Great. And the Law Access New South Wales, I'm sure if you've attended any of our webinars previously, you will have come across this resource. It's a great place to start with lots of different legal issues, but also with motor vehicle accidents. It has a lot of information and it has a step-by-step guide of what to do if you have a motor vehicle accident. And we will be providing a link to some of that information that we will send you after this webinar. And Financial Rights Legal Centre, Alice.
Yep. I'll just mention as well that we also have a lot of fact sheets and pathways to the Law Access website on our problem solver as well, because it was a collaboration with both Legal Aid and Law Access when we were updating the New South Wales pathway. So we got quite a lot of input and assistance to update it, and then also to include more links to Law Access websites and so forth to make sure that people get the most opportunity to get directed to the right place. So with our centre, Financial Rights Legal Centre, like I said previously, we have the Insurance Law Service, which can give advice to individuals. We have the Caseworker line for community workers, and we also have the National Debt Helpline for people who have just general financial hardship because of motor vehicle accident deaths.
Okay, thanks. I've got one question there, but we might have a look at the tool now, and then we'll look at questions after that. So I'm just going to make Alice your presenter so that she can share her screen and take you through the motor vehicle accident process. So hopefully that's come to you now, Alice.
Yes. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Oh. We can, thank you.
Yep, so I'm just moving my webinar window out of the way. Okay, so this is our motor accident problem solver website. Before I launch into this, I just want to mention that it's also mobile friendly. So for instance, if you want to load up the problem solver on your phone or your tablet, it's been created in a format that's also very easily accessible if you're doing outreach or for clients to access just using their mobiles as well. Okay, so the problem solver is this gigantic button right here, and I'll take you through a few examples so that you can sort of see the way that it works in practice. So if you have a client in front of you who has an issue with a car accident, the first question it will ask you is what state are they coming from? So the New South Wales branch is the most detailed branch because we've recently been able to update it. So once they click New South Wales, it will delve into the questions about their situation. So what we have here is, firstly, if they've been in a car accident, are they being chased for money? Are they chasing the other party for money? Do they just need some general advice at this stage, or do they just have some questions about their insurance? So some of these pathways do loop back, so I'll show you how that works, but let's start with someone who's had a car accident and they're being chased for money to pay for the damages. That's one of the most common questions that we get on our phone lines. So once you've clicked that, it will take you to a page that shows you 4 options. Are they at fault? Are they partially at fault? Are they not at fault? Or they don't actually know if they're at fault or not. So if I click they don't know that they're at fault, then what we have here is some information about fault first. So they can have a read and get an idea about, do they think it's likely they're at fault or not? And there's also some links here about what do they do if they need advice about fault. Both financial rights and legal aid don't give advice on fault matters. So we do have some information here about contacting either local community legal centres or the New South Wales Law Society for a private solicitor if that's an issue that they need advice on. So from there, they then get the options again. Do they now think that they're at fault? Are they partially at fault? Or are they not at fault? Or if they're confused and they just want to jump into lodging a claim on their insurance, they can click on that as well. So let's assume that our person is at fault in the accident. They've had a read, they've decided, or maybe gotten advice as well and decided they're probably at fault. Then the problem solver then launches into some information about what they're legally responsible for in terms of how much of the other person's damage they need to pay for. So what we have here is just some information about what they're likely to be up for, what is likely to happen if they're chased by either an insurance company or a debt collector, and just what kinds of things might happen. And then it goes into what options do you have. So that will depend on whether or not they're either insured or not insured. I'm just going to click not insured because, again, a vast majority of our callers are not insured for accidents, and it's a very common question that comes up. So if they're not insured and at fault, then there's usually a few key issues that come up. So either they don't agree with the amount claimed, they can't afford to pay the amount claimed, they might have questions about the limitation periods, it's been such a long time since the accident, and just general processes. So these are the most common questions that we see on our phone lines, and we've basically made up the problem solver to try and answer as many of the common questions as we can. So these would include, does the insurance company have to contact me before they repair the other person's car? What if the driver of the other car said, if you just pay me my excess, then that'll be all okay, but quite often the insurance company then comes back later for the remaining amount. Does the other party need to get 2 or 3 quotes, which unfortunately is an urban legend, and the other party is trying to recover higher car costs as well. So we've covered as many of the common topics as we can. And let's say if this person doesn't agree with the amount that's being claimed from them. So if we click this option, then we have information about damages, how damages is calculated, what types of damages they can be chased for, and like deal with some of the common misconception around damages as well. So what we have here, for instance, is links to sample letters, both on our website. So for instance, we have a sample letter that they can send to the other person's insurance company to dispute the amount claimed. And I'll just open that and show you what that looks like. And we also have a sample request for more documents on the Law Access website as well. So on our website, we have this where they can fill in their contact or their details, and then it will automatically generate a letter for them. And Law Access also has a similar letter as well that you can find here, and they can just copy and paste and fill it in with their information and adjust according to their circumstances. So in this chain, the next step will be, have they either received letter of demand and an itemized invoice, or have they gotten a demand but not yet the invoice for damages? So if they say they haven't gotten that invoice yet, then the next step is giving them information about how to obtain that invoice. And again, we have a law access link here to a sample letter to be able to do that. And I'll just show you here, as I'm filling out each of these steps, this fills. So people can keep track of which options they've chosen, and they can also skip back and choose another option and proceed from there at any point as well. So let's say now they've now gotten the itemized invoice. This will give you some information about what do they do with that invoice, what kind of questions to ask. So do they agree that the invoice covers the damage that they caused in the accident? Is the repair method reasonable? Are the repair costs reasonable? And what you can do step by step in terms of trying to dispute that if you don't agree. And again, we have that link to our sample letter there. And what happens if a settlement can't be agreed on? What you'll notice is that this page is white because it's one of our end pages. So what that means is that once you've gotten to an end page, you can print or PDF what you've done so far. And what that will let you do is it pulls up all of the steps that you've selected and it gives you a printout of every step along that chain. So each of the links that I clicked on, it will go through that process and give the person the information so that they can print it out and read it later. And that would be really useful for community workers as well. So if you've gone through this with a client in front of you, and it is a lot to absorb, it is quite wordy, but we have tried to make it as easy to use as possible. It's a quick reference that you can download and print and give it to them to take home to consider in more detail later on. This end page doesn't need to be the end of the chain though. So after we get to this point, there's still more questions that people can answer. So for instance, if we've dealt with the issue of like, this is what happens if you dispute the amount claimed, but what do they also do if they're in general financial hardship as well? So if they click on that link, they'll get to this page as well, which is another end page, and it gives information about what happens if they're being chased by the other party and there's no insurer involved, or what happens if they're being chased by an insurance company and what the options are, what the next steps are in that process. And again, you can PDF or print the page. Just be aware that once you've come to an end page, if you then switch to a different end page, it doesn't track the previous end page. So if you do print or PDF from here, you will get this as the end page rather than the previous one that we just saw. So if you start moving around, then that will break the chain and it will be a new PDF that you need to print out each time. So this can link back to disputing the amount, and that will take us back to where we were before. But if I go back a step and, for instance, they have further questions, it will loop them back to this step, which is where they selected I'm not insured at fault, and it lets them choose any of these other questions here as well. So if they still had some of these questions that they needed answered, they can keep going through the pathway. Okay, I just wanted to check, have there been any questions? Does anyone want me to explain anything at this point?
Someone asked a question about whether it's only in English, Alice.
Yes, it is only in English. Unfortunately, we just don't have the funding to be able to offer it in other languages.
Okay, and also, is there an app version or just the, because you showed your phone, or do they just go onto it through the internet?
Yep, it's just the same internet address. There is no app version. It's just that the website has been made accessible for people on mobiles, so it will generate and it should look virtually the same as it does. And it's been adjusted to make sure that it does show up in a nice format on mobiles and tablets.
So they're the only two questions I've had so far about the actual guided pathway.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I might just show you as well is this, let's take you back to the start. So I did one scenario just then, but what I will also just show you as well is, so we have these two main pathways. So one is someone who's being chased for money, and then the other who's chasing the other party for money. But we also have more general questions here. So for instance, I've had a car accident and need advice. So someone's just had an accident and nothing has happened yet, but they're not sure sort of where to start. So we have some steps here about like how to start the process. The kinds of things that Joshua was just talking about like, was anyone injured, reporting the matter to police, try and minimize losses in the meantime. So one example, one issue that we get quite commonly is people who've had their cars towed away after an accident, and then the car is left with the towing company. Towing laws differ in every state, but usually towing costs are quite high and they add up per day. So unless they have something in writing from an insurance company saying that the insurer would definitely cover those costs, it's always a good idea to think about, like, should the car stay in towing at the towing storage yard for now, or are they better off moving it somewhere safe while any issues about damages are dealt with? Because quite often those storage fees can easily add up to hundreds or thousands of dollars, and it's something that they really need to be aware of. So this will also look back to these questions about, like, are you at fault? Are you not at fault? You don't believe you're at fault, but the other side says you are, and questions about insurance as well. So we do have a huge section about insurance. So how do I make a claim? What do I do if my insurance claim has been refused? I don't agree with the way the insurance company is handling my claim. Nothing's really happening on my claim. You're being investigated. Can I claim on someone else's insurance? So we have a huge list of questions here. And again, it's designed to reflect the most common questions that we get through our phone lines. The tool is really geared to try and help people who can self-advocate to be able to do as much as they can and to have as many of their questions answered as possible. And with caseworkers and community workers, we hope that you'd find it a useful tool to be able to use if you have a client in front of you, or if you're doing research for a client about what their position is and where they stand. It would be a good idea to jump on this tool, have a play with some of the options, maybe send them the PDF links, and we're always available as well if either you or your client have any questions and want to contact us directly if there's anything that's not covered by the problem solver, or just a tricky issue that they need to talk to somebody about.
Yes, and Alice, someone's asked, if they do call the hotline, can you organise an interpreter?
Yes. We have access to TIS, so we'll be able to organise an interpreter and talk to them right there and there.
Right, excellent. Okay, well, Alice, I might get you to give the presentation back to me and we can go forward from there.
Yep. I might just show one quick thing.
Sure.
If we're going, say, just going back to the main website, if you know what you're looking for, we also have some shortcuts here as well. So we have fact sheets, which will take you directly to some common issues. Our most common ones that get looked at are, I've had a car accident and I'm uninsured. So this has a lot of information in the pathway just in one place here. So you can go directly to that if you've got someone who's uninsured. And another common one would be cars that are written off by the insurance company. So we have two fact sheets about the cars being written off if they dispute it, and also after it's been written off, the fact that the insurance company can take the rest of the year's premiums and the deductions that they can make. So those two are available there. And we also have a shortcut to our sample letters as well. So if they just wanted to go directly into writing to the insurance company, we have ones about disputing the amount claimed, about breaches of the general insurance code of practice, raising a dispute generally, or if they're just in financial hardship, requesting a release from the debt. So there's a lot of information there that you can use as well.
Okay. Thanks so much, Alice. And there'll be a link to where to find the problem solver on in the email that follows the webinar. So you'll have that. So you can find that through the Financial Rights Legal Centre's website, but also through the Law Access New South Wales. So great. I think I've got this back. Just waiting for it to come up. Waiting for next screen, which should be my screen. Here it is. Can you see that, Alice and Josh? Yeah,
Yep.
Great. Okay, so Alice, do you want to take us through this slide? Who is using the tool?
Yep, so we're finding a lot of people are using this website tool. So the graph on the left is the unique users that we have. So we're getting over 5,000 hits a month from people looking at the website. And for each person, like the overall page views is more than about 13,000, sometimes even up to 16,000 a month. So it's been an incredibly successful tool in my view in terms of getting people to both visit the site and then when they're on the site actually clicking through to some of the options and going through some of the pathways on there. So it is really a resource that we do encourage people to use. I mentioned previously that we are short-staffed really on our insurance law hotline. We've just had to cut the operating hours, and we know that there's a lot of unmet demand out there, and there's a lot of that does relate to motor vehicle accidents. So we're always happy to take calls on the phone, but if there is someone who is able to self-advocate, or if you're able to self-advocate or to advocate for them, then I definitely encourage you to have a look at the website, see if it's useful. And I'm always open to feedback as well. Or if you think there's improvements that can be made, or if you spot any errors or typos, please feel free to contact me as well.
And so, Alice, is there a feedback loop on the tool itself where they can click and send you an email, or?
Yes, so if you go to either the Contact Us page or if you go to one of the end pages on the problem solver, there's a comments box at the very bottom, and you can just put feedback through that way as well.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to now just have a quick look at where else you can refer people for help with these type of matters. Someone's just typed in, thanks Alice, a great resource, and I'm sure we'll be using and linking clients to the tool. So
That's
instant
great.
feedback, well done. So this page that's just come up is where to refer people for help, Law Access New South Wales. So they have a page about car accidents, which Alice has referred to. And so you can find that by going onto their website, www.lawaccess.newsouthwales.gov.au. And the types of topics on that page of their website covers things like what to do after an accident, who is responsible, evidence, making a claim, responding to a claim, settling your dispute, going to court, and then they have a range of flow charts to explain the process, and they have forms and frequently asked questions. So that's a good place to also go. And as Alice said, there's links between the problem solver tool and this website. I'm also bringing up a page here about the Law Access New South Wales Guided Pathways page. So this is where you can find a link to the motor vehicle accidents problem solver. You'll see it's down on the bottom right-hand corner, number 9 of all the different guided pathways that have been developed to date in New South Wales for community workers as well as community members to use to have a look at legal problems that commonly arise and the best way to deal with them. So you can find that through the web address on this slide, and as a handout on your control panel, which you can download with a copy of these slides, or just go onto the Law Access New South Wales website and click on the link to Guided Pathways. So there's a number of them there, and Josh is going to talk about a couple of the others that relate to traffic issues. So what about lawyers in private practice? Josh, were you going to talk to this, or Alice? Maybe it was Alice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want to go, Alice?
Yep, sure.
Thanks, Alice.
So as just mentioned earlier, we don't, neither financial rights or legal aid gives advice in the space of personal injury, and it's very tight time limits are involved as well. So we would suggest that people either contact the state insurance regulatory authority that Josh mentioned earlier, or a private solicitor. There are lawyers who work on a no-win, no-fee kind of basis, but it's something to be cautious about because there's always disbursements as well, and there's always a risk of costs coming from the other side if something goes wrong in court. So it's always a good idea for them to get advice about what their best pathway is there. We also don't give any advice about who is at fault in accidents. It's an issue that does come up a lot on our phone lines, but road rules are tricky to wade through, and there's always multiple versions of what happened in an accident. So your caller might tell you one thing, but the other side might have a completely different story to tell. And it's something that it's tricky and it's complex, and particularly if there's multiple cars involved, multiple witnesses and so forth. And it's really an area where we'd recommend that they get advice from either a local community legal centre or a private solicitor as well.
Okay, and I've got there a link on the page that says to visit the New South Wales Law Society Solicitor Referral Service webpage, and there's a link to that in the email that's following this webinar. Alice, I've got a question that came up a bit earlier, and I saved it for now because it's kind of about private lawyers. So what if your insurer, against sufficient evidence, denies your accident claim and you're not at fault? So you go to a private lawyer and they state that there's reasonable prospects of success. Can you claim back the money you spent on the private lawyer from the insurer if there's a win?
I would suggest that the person gets advice first on disputing the claim with the insurance company, because if the insurance company has made a wrong decision, then that's where they'd want to get legal advice, because there's 3 processes to raise a dispute with the insurer. So they can go through the internal dispute resolution section. They can also go through AFCA for their own insurance company, but also if it's against someone else's insurance company, if they weren't at fault and they're chasing the other person's insurance company for less than 15,000, then AFCA also has jurisdiction there, and AFCA is a completely free process. So before they start engaging a private solicitor and start incurring those costs, I think the better process would be to actually raise it as a dispute and just make sure they get that final decision as to whether or not they should be insured or not, or like what the process should be there with the insurer first.
Can you?
I'd also,
sorry, keep going. Sorry.
yeah, I'd also suggest people get advice as well. So if you're talking to a client and like it sounds like the insurer can do something, but like the policy says insurer can do this, but you just have a feeling in your gut that this is unfair or wrong, then get them to get advice as well. So an example might be the person's been in hardship, and because of that they missed the payment on their car registration by a few days, and that's when the accident happened. Strictly speaking, the policy says you're not insured if your rego is expired, but the accident was because the car was parked and someone smashed into them at that point in time. So if the insurance company hasn't suffered any prejudice, like it doesn't matter if the car was registered or not at the time of the accident, it still got smashed into by another person's car, then there's still ways to argue that claim because the insurance company hasn't suffered prejudice, and there's a specific protection in the Insurance Contracts Act around that. So if you do come across anyone where you just feel it's wrong, even if the policy says they can do that, always get advice.
Okay, and the next question I've got here is, can a person still do a claim after 5 years after the accident?
Yes, if they were insured at the time, then they can still go back to lodge a claim. The policies usually say that people should lodge a claim as soon as possible after an accident, but again, it often comes down to the question of what prejudice does the insurance company suffer because of the delay. Sometimes it might be because you can't find witnesses anymore, or like you can't tell what the damage from the accident was, or like differentiate between the accident damage and later damage that's occurred. So sometimes it can be more difficult to argue, but that's not to say you don't have a valid claim. So the idea would be to lodge a claim as soon as you can, but get advice if the insurer throws any roadblocks up.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice. All right, what do we got next? So Josh, you're going to take us through the types of services where you can get free legal help.
Yeah, so I guess the best place often to start if you're not sure where to go would be Law Access, because they can refer you to the Community Legal Centre or the Legal Aid Office, or the relevant place for you. So they offer that referral assistance for you to point you in the right direction. But because you've attended this webinar and you kind of know that Financial Rights Legal Centre provide this service, you could also go direct to them. I guess Alice has also talked to about how much demand there is. So potentially with some of the tools that we've already mentioned today and some of the resources, depending on how confident you felt, you could try and use those tools to try and resolve the legal issue with your client that you're working with, without the need to contact Law Access or Financial Rights Legal Centre or another community legal centre. But there are those, if you get to a point where you're stuck, you could still contact Financial Rights Legal Centre or Law Access New South Wales as a starting point, and they can point you in the right direction. If you are having issues in terms of financial hardship, which can be very relevant to if you're uninsured and you're being chased by an insurer or by another driver, you may want to have a statement of financial position, which sets out all of your income and your assets and your liabilities. And you can speak to a financial counsellor for free by calling that 1-800-007-007 number. And they can connect you to a financial counsellor to go through that process with you. But those are some of our starting points that we'd recommend that people take. And I just wanted to do a massive shout out about how amazing I think the tool is, the motor vehicle accident problem solver tool. And I know that lots of people, lots of my colleagues use it, and we love using it, and we find it to be a really useful tool. And if I have a friend or a family member that has an accident, I would definitely be pointing them to that as well, because I just think it's such a great resource.
Okay, thanks, Josh. So just quickly, Josh, if you want to take us through this slide, which is looking at the other types of legal problems that can arise when a person is driving in New South Wales.
Yeah, so if you do have a driving offence or a fine, we've just had that previous slide which showed some of the different guided pathways that people might be able to use. So similar idea to the one that we've looked at today. You can go to the Law Access website, click on guided pathways, and there's guided pathways both for driving offences and fines. The Fine Fix in New South Wales one is, yep, so they're both there, and you can use those tools to try to resolve your legal issue. The Service New South Wales website gives you information about getting a New South Wales driver's licence. If you've had your driver's license revoked, the Law Access website also has information about what you can do in that situation. And the New South Wales Fair Trading Car Buyer's Guide will give you some good information, and we'll be sending that in the email after this webinar.
One suggestion I'd make is that if you have a person who's come to you and they're thinking about buying a car, particularly if they're thinking Gumtree or Facebook or one of those secondhand private sales, to make sure that they do a PPSR check. So PPSR stands for the Personal Property Security Register, and it's a $2 fee to do a check to make sure that there's not a loan secured over the car, because if they buy the car and there's a loan over it, whoever that lender is still has first dibs to that car. So this does actually come up quite often in the context of insurance claims, because most policies will require the insurance company to pay out the loan first. So it might not actually leave a person with any money left after that happens.
Okay, good tip. Thanks, Alice. And we'll put a link to the PPSR website in the email that comes after the webinar for people to have a look at that. All right, so what's coming up now is a slide to remind you that you can order for free Legal Aid New South Wales publications to be delivered to your servers. So you have those. They're also on the publications page of our website. All of our resources are also available in PDF, so you can actually just download them and share them with your clients just particularly during this time when you're not actually seeing people face to face. And one of them is called Crashed Your Car. And just to let you know that that's available in English, Arabic, Vietnamese, Farsi and Chinese. So we do have that as a resource that is translated, which might be useful for those people who were asking about whether the guided pathway was available in other languages. So that's called Crash Your Car, and you can look that up on the Legal Aid New South Wales website under the Publications tab. And that brochure takes people through the important steps you need to take if your car is damaged in a car accident. So it talks about after the accident, making a claim, collecting evidence, obtaining quotes, negotiating who will pay, paying for damage, sending a letter of demand, responding to a letter of demand, going to court, and enforcing a court order if you get that. I think Josh, you were saying there's a couple of things that are out of date, but they're being updated. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a reference in there to the jurisdiction of the small claims division being $10,000, which has now increased to $20,000. But yeah, I think generally it's still good information in there, and it captures a lot of the really important principles if you do have a motor vehicle accident or somebody you're working with does.
Yeah, and particularly the fact that it is translated. So for people who want to talk to their clients and show them that resource in those languages. And again, they can be downloaded in PDF from the website as well. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our webinar. So if anyone's got any other questions, please type them in. So I will wait for those questions, but while we wait, I will say thanks both to Alice and Josh for your time today and sharing your knowledge with us. Also a reminder that when we close the webinar, there'll be a feedback survey, and we appreciate your feedback, and an email with links to the resources that we've talked about today. So that you have that to keep as a resource for you if you want to follow up any of those. And if you're watching this webinar as a recording, you can see our email address on the slide now, cle@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au. That's where you can send your questions and we'll get those answered. So I've just got one thing. I'm sure I got very good information to share with my clients. So that's great. And in the email that you receive after the webinar, you can see there's a link to get our monthly newsletter if you want to attend future webinars. So it looks like no questions, just thank yous coming through, I think, from what I can see here. So again, thanks very much, Alice and Josh, for your time today and sharing your amazing knowledge about all things to do with motor vehicle accidents. We should say stay safe out there. We hope people don't have motor vehicle accidents, but obviously they do happen. Alice, you were saying that it's one of the most common questions you get on your insurance law hotline. Is that right?
Yep, it slowed a little bit during last year's lockdown, but it's been busy pretty much all year this year. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we might close the webinar, and we look forward to welcoming everyone to our next Law for Community Workers webinar coming up. We've got quite a few planned for October. Okay. So thanks again, Alice and Josh. I'll say goodbye, and we'll close the webinar.
Thanks.
Bye.